Hey everybody, my name is Sternke. Welcome to the Artist's House Pro Tools tutorial. I'm going to be taking you guys through some of the basics of learning how to operate the most popular digital audio workstation out there, which is, of course, DigiDesign's Pro Tools. You've probably heard of Pro Tools before, not sure how much you know about it, but I'm going to show you that it's a really easy program and a great program to use, and that really anyone can afford it and anyone can learn how to use it. It's a really user-friendly program, very intuitive, and I'm going to have you recording by the end of this tutorial here. So, to start off, the first thing you have to know about Pro Tools, it's made by a company called DigiDesign, as I mentioned, and there's a whole bunch of information on their website, which is digidesign.com. The first thing you have to know, though, about Pro Tools is that it comes in two main versions. Pro Tools HD and Pro Tools LE. Now, Pro Tools HD is, of course, HD stands for high definition, and that is, of course, the full-featured Pro Tools that you've maybe seen in large recording studios if you've ever been in there, and it's, as I said before, by far the most popular platform for recording digitally in the studio. And the thing about HD that makes it different from LE, as well as different from other recording programs such as Nuendo and Cubase, Logic, and Sonar, some of these other programs, is that Pro Tools HD has dedicated cards. They're physical cards that you put actually in your computer, and they do the processing of the audio on those cards. So you don't have to have a super powerful computer in order to run Pro Tools, which is really cool. They take the load off of the computer and they do the processing. They help process the plugins, and they help you with the track count, and they help you with latency, and they just help the program to run really, really smoothly. And that's really what Pro Tools, I think one of the big things about Pro Tools that separates it is that it is so stable. It's a rock solid platform. And certainly with HD, especially with these cards, you can actually use multiple cards. Like a standard setup for a large studio is a HD3 system, which means that it has 3 of those cards in there. Each one of those cards is effectively like a 900 megahertz processor. So once you start stacking those up, you can see that it can add up to a very powerful system. Now, for Pro Tools HD, just to get started, you're looking at, for an interface, for one card, and for the software, you're looking at about $10,000. And most of us don't have that kind of money. Certainly I don't have that kind of money. And so for people like me, and possibly you out there, DigiDesign has come up with a version of Pro Tools for us, an affordable version called Pro Tools LE. Now, LE stands for Limited Edition or Light Edition. And really, essentially, when LE first came out, they had a lot of features that were stripped away, and it wasn't really considered a professional platform. But they've started, as computers have gotten more and more powerful, they've started adding features, and whereas nowadays, LE is just as professional as any other program out there, Nuendo or any of these programs. It has a few limitations. There's a few differences between HD and LE, but across both systems, you can open up an LE session in an HD on an HD system, and vice versa as well. So you can that's the cool thing about it, is I can go to a large studio and record drums or basic tracks or whatever, come back to my place and open it up in my LE rig, and everything's where it should be. So LE is a much more affordable option, and I'm going to take you through some of the available interfaces that are out there for LE. And as you'll see, there's an interface for every budget. All right, so I'm going to show you guys some of the available interfaces for Pro Tools LE. There's a lot there's a lot of them out there, and there's some really cool, really affordable interfaces. Now, the first thing you got to understand about these that separates Pro Tools and DigiDesign from other platforms is that when you buy one of these interfaces, you get the software. Now, that's not true of any other company, which is something a lot of people don't realize about Pro Tools, is that if you buy an M-Box, you buy a Digi 002, you get Pro Tools LE with it, which is a really cool feature, and it makes the hardware and the software really talk to each other flawlessly, and makes things a lot easier in the studio. So if you want to take a look up here, I've got a couple of the interfaces up here, and we're just gonna take a look at them. The first one is the M-Box. The M-Box 2 actually is the latest revision of this. It's a really basic interface. It's got it works off USB, and it's got just a couple simple little things going on. It's got 2 microphone inputs. It's got 2 outputs, also DI inputs on those inputs 1 and 2. It's got SPDIF or SPDIF digital in and out, and it's got the MIDI in and out. And like as I said, it works off USB. It's got a couple features on the front, a headphone in and out, but it's a real basic unit, and it's a lot of people use the M-Box. There's a lot of M-Boxes out there, and certainly it's a very cost-effective. I think it's about $400 or $500 brand new for an M-Box 2. It's a great option, and you can easily get going with one of these units. Now, moving on from there, we have this new unit called the M-Box 2 Mini, which is an even smaller version of the M-Box. Essentially, it's the same minus a few features. You only have 1 mic input, and you don't have MIDI on it. But it's just for people who want to have a very compact system. Just throw it in your laptop case and go somewhere and record demos, do whatever. That's the M-Box 2 Mini. The next one, the M-Box 2 Pro. This is a really cool addition to the M-Box line, and it brings it up a level, in my opinion, because of one key feature, which is that it works off FireWire instead of USB. Now, with FireWire, it's a much faster protocol, so you got a lot more bandwidth there for information and for audio to be flowing through there. Again, you got 2 microphone inputs, an additional aux in. You got a separate monitor out, and then 4 line outs, as well as SPDIF in and out, foot switch in and out, or a foot switch here, and then you got word clock and also MIDI. And as I said, works off FireWire. This is a great unit. Some of my friends have this, and it's worked flawlessly for them. Again, comes with Pro Tools LE. So that's the M-Box 2 Pro. That's a really new unit. I think this one is $600 new. So this is, again, a cost-effective option. For $600, you got an interface with software. You're ready to go. The next one, this is actually the Digi 002. They now have the 003, which we'll look at in a minute. But this is a common piece that's out there. As you can see, it's not only an interface, but it's also a control surface. It has faders, and essentially these faders are just it's basically like stuff that you would just do with your mouse, but it's just a lot easier to kind of get your hands on the faders there. We'll see in the next slide, which is the Digi 002 rack. The Digi 002 and the rack here have the same exact inputs and outputs. The Digi 002 can also function as a standalone mixer, which is kind of a cool feature. But anyway, as you can see here on the back, there's a lot more options. And as you may have seen in my rack here, this is the unit that I own and use. Here it is, the Digi 002 rack. I've had this for about 3 or 4 years. 3 years probably. And actually probably 4 years, and this thing has worked flawlessly for me. It's a rock solid unit. I've taken it all over. I've taken it on tour. I've used it live, and it's a great unit. I'd recommend it definitely. As you can see, it's got a couple more things going on. It's got 4 preamps inputs. It's got MIDI in and 2 MIDI outputs, which is cool if you're doing a lot of MIDI stuff. It's got 4 additional line inputs, so it's got 8 total line inputs. Separate monitor out, main out, and then 6 more outputs there. It's also got, which is this is really cool, optical in and out, which functions on the ADAT protocol, which is 8-channel digital input. So if you have a unit that can convert to ADAT optical, you can have 8 more channels of digital in. So if you had this system maxed out, you could be recording 18 tracks at a time. So really, that's pretty cool. And I've used it to record, full drum kits and everything. And as I said, it's a workhorse. It's been really, for the most part, it's been really great for me. Again, comes with Pro Tools LE software. And finally, the Digi 003, which is the new incarnation of the 002. Essentially the same. It's got a little different form factor. It's got these little mushroom knobs that Digi likes to use nowadays. But as we'll see in the next slide, this Digi 003 rack has essentially the same stuff as the 002. They've added word clock in and out, and they've added another headphone output on the front. They kept the price the same, so they haven't jacked up the price or anything. They claim the preamps are a little bit better on this unit. But that gives you a basic idea of some of the interfaces that are out there for Pro Tools LE. And in addition to these interfaces, DigiDesign recently bought a company called M Audio, and now there are a vast array of M Audio products that work with a new version of Pro Tools called Pro Tools M Powered. Now, the difference with M Powered is you have to buy the software separately. So there's a lot of different options, and if you go on M Audio's website, you can see there's a lot of interfaces that say compatible with Pro Tools M Powered. But just bear in mind, with those interfaces, you do have to pay about $300 just for the software, whereas with the interfaces direct from DigiDesign, you get the software when you buy the hardware. So that's a brief look at the interfaces, and up next, I'm going to show you how to create a new session and get you recording. All right, now I'm going to walk you guys through how to create a new session in Pro Tools. I'm going to assume that you've purchased an interface, that you've installed Pro Tools on your computer, and that everything's groovy there. So the first thing you do is you just go, if you're using a Mac, which I am, down to your dock. This is the little Pro Tools icon here, and you just click it to launch Pro Tools. I'm running Pro Tools 7.3. It's the latest version of Pro Tools, and just wait for it to load up. It's loading all my plugins and effects and things right now. And once it's loaded up, in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you will see that it says Pro Tools LE up there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up there to File and New Session. As you can see, the hotkey for this is Apple N. I would advise, too, learning the hotkeys because they can make your life a lot easier and quicker inside of Pro Tools. It's now, this is the New Session dialog box here. I'm going to go ahead and save it on my external drive here. This is on the left-hand side is where you can select where you save it, on my internal drive, my other internal Raptor drive, or my external drive here, my LaCie drive. I'm going to save it on this external drive, and then it asks you what you want to name it. I'm going to name it Test Session 1. You can name it whatever, name it, the name of the song, whatever. And down at the bottom here, there's a few session parameters that are really important, and you should pay attention to these. First of all, audio file type. If I click on that, there's 3 options there. WAV files, AIFF, or SD2. I would advise just keep that on WAV. There's not a sound quality difference, but WAV files are the most universally recognized across all formats. So stick with WAV files. For sample rate, you got a couple options here. Now, if you have an MBox 1, you probably don't have these two options, 88.2 or 96K. You may just have 48 and 44.1. We're going to stick with just 48, and for our bit depth, we're going to keep it on 24. You can choose between 24 or 16. We're going to keep it on 24. And then this is important here, I/O settings. Put it on stereo mix. This is just going to make your life easier. If you put it on last used and you're opening somebody else's session, the I/O stands for in and out, obviously, and it'll cause you headaches. So just put that on stereo mix. So we have everything ready here, and once you do that, you just click down here in the lower right, click Save, and wait for it to load up. And here we are inside of Pro Tools, our first Pro Tools session. And there's no tracks or anything. We haven't created anything yet. But this main window that comes up when you open up Pro Tools is called the Edit window. And this is really the main window that a lot of stuff happens from. You can do a lot of things from this window. Now, the first thing we're going to do is create a click track. So the way you do that is you go up to the top here, to the track menu, and hit New. That'll bring up this little New Tracks dialog box. There's a few different options here. You can create, several or just one. We're just going to create one. We're going to create a mono. We don't need a stereo click. And we're going to keep it as an audio track. Of course, if I click on this mono here, you can do mono or stereo. If I click on this audio track, you can do audio track, aux input, master fader, MIDI track, or instrument track, which are all really exciting things we're not going to get into right now. And then this last dialog box says in samples or ticks. Now, that basically means is the audio file going to follow the main time scale, absolute time, or is it going to follow the beats of your session, like the BPM? So if you have a let's say if you're creating a drum track, you'd probably want to do it in ticks, but that is a loop track, a drum track just from samples and things. But we're just going to keep it in samples, one mono audio track in samples, and hit Create. And there it is. By default, it just calls it Audio 1. And you should get into the habit of always naming your tracks before you do anything else with them. Always name your track. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click right here on the track name. Click, click, and that brings up this little box, which just asks me to name the track. I'm just going to name it Click. Hit OK, or just hit Enter, and there it is. You got it. Now, a couple more things before we move on. I want to make sure that you're viewing your inserts right here next to the track name. I have them viewed right now, but you may have opened your session and you don't see these inserts right here. If you go up to the upper left here of the screen, there's this little Edit Window View Selector thing. If you click on that, that gives you a bunch of options of what you're viewing in your edit window. We're viewing our IOs, we're viewing our track color, and our inserts. Just make sure that little inserts thing is checked. If it's not checked, that'll go away, and we need that there to load up our Click plugin. So just make sure that's checked. That's the first thing. The second thing is, up here at the top, under Options, make sure at the very bottom of this menu here, make sure Low Latency Monitoring is on. Now, this is only going to be an option if you have a Digi-002 or Digi-003, or actually an MBox 2 Pro, because it has FireWire. The regular MBox and the MBox 2 don't have that option because they're USB and they can't process the audio fast enough to do it in low latency monitoring mode. Now, what that means is they have a special control that you can mix between what you're hearing in your headphones when you're recording and your playback. That's a separate thing, especially for the MBox. But since I'm demonstrating with the Digi-002, just make sure that low latency monitoring is on, and also the inserts are enabled. So now that we have those things sorted out, we're going to go up here to our inserts, and these little tiny up and down arrows here. I'm going to click on the top one, and I'm going to go to Plugin, and down to Instrument. They consider the click an instrument, I guess. And there it is, Click. That loads up the Click plugin. There it is, nothing fancy. If I click here where it says Factory Default, it gives me a few options for different click sounds. There's a cowbell, there's a marimba, and you can save your own whatever. We're just going to keep it on the factory default because that's the click that I like, and X out of that. Cool. So now we have our click loaded up, and if I hit play by hitting spacebar, there's the click. The next thing you will likely want to do is set your session tempo. And this is really easy to do, and it's really cool the way that Pro Tools has done it. If we go back up here, there's a tiny little red triangle here that says 120 next to it. Now the default session tempo for all Pro Tools sessions is 120. If I go up here to this triangle, my cursor becomes a little pointer finger, and I double click on that triangle. It brings up this little tempo change dialog box here. And I can enter in my BPM. I can just enter it in, by hand. Or what's really cool is if I click right here, I can tap with the T key on my keyboard. Let's say I know I want my session that fast. And it analyzes that and enters in your tempo for you, which is really cool feature. Once you're happy with your tempo, we're just going to keep ours at 120. Once you're happy with your tempo, click OK, and you are ready to go. And there it is. Also, Apple S. Remember that, Apple S. Get into the habit of hitting Apple S all the time. Apple S is just part of my behavior now. Apple S, of course, is save. You always want to be saving, always be saving. Just after everything you do, create a click track, save. Create another track, save. Record something, save. That has saved me a lot of headaches, having that in my brain. You don't want to record the perfect take with somebody and then, oh wow, that was so brilliant, and then the computer crashes and you forgot to save it. So always be saving. Cool. Well, the next thing we're going to do before I pick up my guitar and record is I'm going to create a track, another track. So we do that the same way we did before. We go up to Track and hit New. Incidentally, the hotkey for that is Shift Apple N. Again, we're going to do the same kind of track. One mono audio track in samples. Easy. Then we're going to go down to our track. We're going to double click it where it says Audio 1. We're going to name it Acoustic. Okay, so now something new. We're going to set the input of the track. Now this is really important, obviously. The input of the track is this little guy right here, where it says mic line 2. This is the input and this is the output. Everything right now is going out of analog 1 and 2. That's my only outputs. That's what's coming to my speakers. That's what I'm hearing. So that's good. And actually, this is set on the right input. But if I click here, you'll see that there's several options. And this reflects basically what the back of the Digi-002 rack has available for inputs. It's got several analog inputs as well as these mic line inputs. It's got those ADAT inputs I talked about, which are digital, and then SPDIF left and right as well. So, but we're just going to keep it on 2 because that's the input that I'm plugged into with my microphone on the back of the unit. So we're ready to go here, and and when we come back, we're going to record about 8 bars of acoustic guitar, and you'll be on your way. All right, so I got my microphone set up here. I have it plugged into input 2, mic line 2 on the back of my Digi-002 here. I've got the gain turned up on the front here and everything. And if you look up at the screen, I'm going to go ahead and hit the R here under the track name. That arms the track, so it's ready to record. If I hit that, you can see the meter there as I'm talking. You can see it jumping up, and I'm going to grab my acoustic guitar here and just play a little bit. That looks like pretty good level. You just want to make sure you're not clipping. If you clip, the meter will turn red at the top. But we're looking good, so all we got to do now is hit record, and we're going. And of course, I'm doing this listening to the click through the speakers, but of course, you'll want to be using headphones so that the click doesn't bleed into your acoustic mic. This is a really sensitive mic, and of course, it's going to pick up the click track that's coming through the speakers. But just to show you guys, I'm going to have the click coming out of the speakers. So we're set. We're ready to go. All we have to do now is hit either Apple spacebar or 3 on the numeric keypad. Those are just 2 different ways. As you'll see as you're learning Pro Tools, there's 4 or 5 different ways to do the same thing, and that's just so people with different mindsets can have a fast workflow inside of Pro Tools. I always just hit 3 because there's just 1 key. It's really easy to hit, and it starts your recording. So I'm going to hit that. I'm going to wait for a couple bars of count in, and then I'm going to just record a little 8-bar phrase and be finished. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. When you're finished, just hit spacebar, and you're done. You've just recorded. If you've been following along, you just recorded your first track inside of Pro Tools. So as you can see, it's a really easy, intuitive program to use. In the next session, we're going to get into some more specifics about the menus and how to really manipulate the audio in the way that you want, how to import audio and loops into your session. But that should get you going, so good luck.